Welcome to the Ride With Us podcast, presented by the American Coaster Enthusiasts, the world's largest ride enthusiast organization dedicated to the appreciation, promotion, and preservation of roller coasters around the globe. So please keep your hands and feet inside the podcast at all times as we welcome in your host.
Hello, enthusiasts. It's your host, Jessica Gardner. This year, the Themed Entertainment Association held their annual gala, the THEA Awards, celebrating excellence and achievement in themed entertainment in Hollywood, California. I was lucky enough to attend the gala and a couple of the panel sessions at THEA Connect, the event that happens during the week leading up to the gala celebration. This year, some of the awards for outstanding achievement given out were for Fantasy Springs at Tokyo Disney Sea, Zootopia at Shanghai Disneyland, the Sphere in Las Vegas, the Aquascope in France, Chimelong Show and Chimelong Spaceship in China, Ghibli Park, Valley of the Witches in Japan, the BD Extroids in Galaxy's Edge, and Voltron Nevera at Europa Park in Germany, just to name a few. The TEA also gave out the Buzz Price Life Achievement Award, recognizing a lifetime of distinguished achievements to Rick Rothschild. While the average person may not recognize his name, unless they're a huge Disney Parks nerd like me, they definitely know the projects he worked on over his 50 years in the industry. Projects like the American Adventure at Epcot, the Adventurers Club at Pleasure Island, Captain EO for Disneyland, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, ExtraTERRORestrial Alien Encounter for Magic Kingdom, and of course, Soarin for Disney California Adventure, which evolved into creating the flyover theaters for his own company, Far Out, with attractions in Vancouver, Las Vegas, and Chicago. And listeners, I was lucky enough to sit down and chat with Rick. We were in a small conference room at the TEA event, and I just totally nerded out with him about his career and achievements. I didn't know if he'd talk to me for 5 minutes or 45 minutes, but he was just so open and wonderful, and he told some great behind-the-scenes stories. And while I was recording it, I thought to myself, you know what? The listeners of Ride With Us might like to hear this. So here it is. I think if you love theme parks, you'll be inspired just like I was. Enjoy. Tell everybody a little bit about your background. You started in the theater, like professional background. You started in the theater, right?
I did. I trained in the theater and also was studying psychology and made the decision along the way that my heart was in theater, although my head still retained a lot of the psychology training I got, which was helpful in my work.
Definitely helpful. I'm sure it helped you craft story, which is so important to what you do, right?
Exactly.
And then I know when you were younger, you were inspired. Your mom, is it true that she worked at the World's Fair?
She worked at the 39 World's Fair.
39 World's Fair. Yeah. What did she do there?
She worked in one of the 5 houses of the future.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay.
And as she told it, she had the best job because it was summertime in New York, and summertime in New York can be miserable in its humidity and heat. She worked in the house that featured the first available residential air conditioning.
Oh my gosh.
So she said, my going to work was not only fun with all the people and all this, but it felt good.
In the middle of summertime in New York.
Yeah. She wanted to go back, for all of us to go back and see this World's Fair that had opened on basically the same site, which was the 64 World's Fair.
And what was that like to you going to the World's Fair? You were pretty young.
I was a teenager. And two things happened that summer that I was able to enjoy. One was the World's Fair, which we'll talk more about. And the other was actually the Beatles coming to America.
Oh, right?
And,
what a great year.
Yeah. And they came to New York and they played Forest Hills, which was the site of the old American tennis that's now moved out by in Flushing.
Oh, okay.
But it used to be at this location, and that's where they hosted the Beatles. That was the biggest, I guess, appropriate outdoor stadium at the time. And my cousin, who was a few years older than I, was running lights.
Oh,
so I was in the booth behind my cousin watching the Beatles in 1964. But that was not the thing that sent me in the direction of my career. but the World's Fair was.
The World's Fair?
Yeah.
What specifically at the World's Fair?
Well, there was so much there to see and enjoy, but clearly the Disney work that we all know was there. I was infatuated by the animated figures. I was infatuated by Mr. Lincoln and by the Carousel of Progress and the whole staging of the Carousel of Progress.
Right.
Small World. It was not
there.
my favorite. As a young teenager, I was
sure that wasn't really your jam.
Yeah. But I was just impressed by these attractions, which, I mean, I was a California kid, so I'd been to Disneyland and already sort of taken by Peter Pan, which was my favorite attraction originally. But seeing those figures just was a seminal moment, I guess you could say.
And you thought maybe that you'd want to work in the industry someday from that?
I certainly came to that notion as I went through. I hadn't really. I'd started working in theater in high school by the time I was at the World's Fair, but went to college, and in college was clearly that's where I wanted to go, was in some form of the arts, performance. And one thing led to another, and multiple letters of rejection. And I figured, well, Disney will never be a part of my career. And then by a strange set of circumstances, I ended up learning what we all today, I think everybody understands what networking is. Well, back in the days when I was first starting out, that didn't exist as a word.
Yeah.
In fact, the network, the kind of network.
Right, exactly.
CBS, ABC, and NBC, that was the network. But I learned the valuable lesson about networking through some vendors that I worked on a job, and they said, "What are you doing when you're finished with this work?" And I said, "Well, I'll go back to Los Angeles and pick up more, work in the industry." And they said, "Well, you're the kind of person that Disney would like."
Yeah.
And I go, "Yeah, letter rejection,
They
letter
don't like
rejection."
me at all.
I said, no, we know somebody. So I had this interview in August of 1978 with Eric Weston, who was at Imagineering. And he interviewed me, and then he said, "Come with me." And he took me down into this room, which opened these big double doors. And in there were all the Epcot models. And
my gosh.
He said, "So this is what we're doing, and this is why I'm talking to you." And he said, I will hire you. He said, "This interview, clearly you have something that we can take advantage of, and I, Eric, would like to have you be a part of that. But this is August, and we haven't publicly announced until October 1st, 1978, that we're going to do this project. So there's a hiring freeze on here at Imagineering." So he said, "If you can wait that long," I said, "Yeah, I guess I can wait that long." And he literally called me October 2nd.
You're kidding.
And said, "You ready to go to work?" And I started 4th of December, 1978.
Wow, that's incredible.
So I was one of the early, what became known in the industry, at least, as one of the many Epcot babies.
Yeah.
Of which there were close to 2,500 or more. Because Disney, when I started there, was 480 employees at that time. And it grew very quickly to over 3,000. So.
Wow.
But anyway, so that's how I got involved there and how I started. And I started as a coordinator.
As a coordinator. And so then how did you end up working on American Adventure?
Well, that to me is what Imagineering, at least at the time, and I think it had always been that way, was a place where people recognized talents that people had and the potential they might have to apply those talents that in some cases the individual may not have even recognized in themselves. And in some cases, with Epcot, for example, the necessity was an opportunity for many because there was so much to do. And so I had the opportunity within the first year there to move from what I had been doing, which I pretty much had completed doing, my work in coordination. And I was offered an opportunity to move into the creative group and work with Randy Bright, who had just been appointed by Marty from a writer at Imagineering to the head of all of the scripting.
Marty Sklar, yeah.
Marty Sklar appointed Randy to be the in charge of all the scripting for not only Epcot, but also for Tokyo Disneyland that was going on simultaneously. And Randy was looking for an assistant. And I had a several individuals, another man who those in your audience who know all of this older history, Wathel Rogers, who was an animator for many years there, a figure animator and so forth, had mentioned to Randy that he thought I might be a good fit for Randy. And so Randy had this conversation with me on a Friday, close to the end of the year of 1979. So I've been there almost a year. And he said, I just know I need to have somebody help me and assist me, and I cannot give you a job description.
Okay.
And he said, can you let me know by Monday? So Monday, without much thinking, it was like, if somebody's offering me a job here when I was thinking I no longer really had anything to do, number one. Number two, the opportunity to work in this area of the company. And number three, with no job description.
The top secret.
I'm in.
This like Mission Impossible. Like if you choose to accept it.
And so the connection there to the American Adventure then was that Randy had been the first, and by the time we'd reached this opportunity to work with him, the fifth writer of the American Adventures, or American Adventure concept.
Wow.
And it was in full swing, but I came to realize that a lot of what was needed on a daily basis by that team, partially because I was so interested in it being a theatrical presentation, it just intrigued me. And I started working with the team, and very quickly, probably within 6 months, the team recognized that it was missing the kind of leadership that it needed creatively, because Randy couldn't focus on it because he had all this other work. So I said, well, I can maybe do that. And there were several others on the team that said equally, went to Marty and to Randy and said, can we think about having Rick sort of take a role to help creatively direct the day-to-day part of the show. And so that's what happened. A little sidebar on that. We all know that Marty was a wordsmith, and words meant everything to him. So when there was a discussion of like, well, what are we going to call you? When we announced, back in those days, they sent out, memos, and they would, be distributed in everybody's little mailbox. Not their computer mailbox, because there weren't any.
Their actual mailbox.
And anyways, what are we going to call you? And I said, well, you're basically, from my training, from my background, you're asking me to be the director of the show.
Yeah.
Randy's the producer, he's the writer. I'm going to help direct the show. And Marty said, well, that will confuse everybody, because forever in this culture, art director was what director meant. And he said, and you're not an art director. And I said, no, I'm a show director.
Yeah, it's different.
And he goes, well, maybe we'll call you a show producer. So that was the beginning at Imagineering of the role of show producer. There had not been a show producer before that. So I was like, okay, well, it took a few years, and eventually everybody agreed, although they had brought on other show producers who were producers. I finally was given the title that I had asked for to begin with, which was show director.
Oh, wow.
So, but a humorous story on this too was that shortly after my taking this role, Barry Braverman, who'd been working with Tony Baxter on the Imagination Pavilion, Tony needed a similar partner, but he needed a producer. And so Barry became the second show producer.
Oh, nice.
Very different role. But what was humorous to both Barry and I was that Marty sent out a little memo on announcing Barry taking this role with Tony. And he basically described Barry's job description as Barry will be doing with Tony what Rick Rothschild has been doing on American Adventure. End of sentence. So I called Barry up and I said, well, it's nice to know that we're both doing something. And
can you put that on a business card?
So anyway, but like I say, there are and there still are many show producers there.
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone has the evolution of art director to creative director at Imagineering has also become a title. There were no creative directors back in those days.
Wow.
And a lot of what I do today is creative directing, which includes show directing. in the specifics of directing, not just creatively, but actually actively directing pieces of media and other things. But I don't think really the pure role of what I fulfilled for Disney for many years has been filled since I left there. And I think also there's a reason, as things have evolved, how they do things today collectively. That need is still there, but it's filled in different ways.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
Well, in the sense that a lot of pre-visualization occurs. And so I think a lot of what we all did with Epcot, pre-visualization was in the form of models. Mm-hmm. Take American Adventure, for example. The pre-visualization of that was building this 3-inch to the foot, so a large-scale model of the theater, building an entire wagon, scenic wagon, all the lifts. Yeah. I mean, it was this amazing mechanical model that helped us, along with a rear projection screen, and we would project animatic, sort of developing slideshows using slide projectors. I mean, it was all, when you think of it today, it was quite low tech. But again, that was part of my responsibility, was to begin to sort of put all of that together. And today, I think there still are creative directors that work with designers and animators, and they work in the CG world. But I think there's a difference to how sometimes who leads those.
Right. And might be more of a team or a lot of people, a lot of cooks in the kitchen, rather than someone's mostly vision and everybody kind of following them. Is that what you mean?
So. Yeah. In some ways, I think that's true. And at the same time, in many of what Disney and other theme parks do, there's still a strong role for the overall, quote, creative director or art director. Because so many of these attractions obviously still are, is built around the environmental design and taking you into these special places. So there you go.
So after American Adventure, what was your next big project? Was that Pleasure Island?
No, actually, the next big project, there was things like we were talking about, developing other concepts for other attractions. The Israel Pavilion was one of them.
That never made it to
Never made it, but was fully, I mean, we took a lengthy trip, Marty and myself and several others, to Israel, and came back and created this amazing experience that never saw the light of day. So there was some of that kind of work. There was the beginning also of looking to putting Disney in a box, which had been done previously. There had been work done, I guess, in the 70s, if not the late 60s. It was after the World's Fair, well after the World's Fair, but there was a thought at Imagineering, and Walt was obviously still alive at that time. And they looked at a location in St. Louis, I believe, where they basically, can we stack up and make some kind of a themed experience? So Disney in a box. So there was we weren't doing a lot of development on new things. There was a few little things that needed to get taken care of at Epcot. I did actually, going as I think backwards, Backstage Magic, which was the show in the Communicore about how computers controlled all of Epcot.
Computers are the future.
Well, and they were at the heart, and this whole idea of sort of peeling the backstage magic back for the guests. So they had done a show there that opened with, called the Studer Computer Review.
Oh, wow.
Which was sort of a song and dance musical about how computers do things. And Sperry Univac, back in those days, was our corporation that provided all of this equipment and sponsored this little attraction.
I gotta look that up on YouTube.
You can't. Well, it was awful. And
oh no.
Yeah, I mean, not everything that Disney or anybody does always hits, and that one was the one that didn't quite hit. And Sperry made it very clear after opening it didn't really hit. So I was asked to come in and look at, without completely departing from the location, and I mean, we were looking ultimately into DAX Central, the control for all of Epcot's show from this one location in Communicore, and a story about how computers help all of that. So anyways, I was asked to come in and rethink. So that was the first one of many shows that I rethought which was a part of my career that also played into part of my collective Disney experience. So we did that. And then, as I was saying, there was this period of time where there was development and not a lot to do. And then we weathered some corporate storms, and ultimately Eisner and Wells showed up in '85. And so shortly after that, I was asked with several other Imagineers with Marty, to sit in a room. Eisner came over and said, okay, so if you had Michael Jackson, you had George Lucas, and you had 3D, what do you do? I'll be back in a week. That was basically the conversation. So there were four of us, with me leading the team, but it was a collective effort for sure. Joe Rohde, Richard Vaughn, and Tim Kirk, and myself were the principals. And in a very short period of time, a week, we had come up with 3 different ideas with some wonderful quick little sketches by several of the team. And we had, one of them was called the Intergalactic Music Man.
That's a great name. I mean, it tells you everything that you need to know.
And it was basically the story that Captain EO tells. And so we pitched it, and they said, we had sort of liked that one of the 3 that we'd come up with. We did one that was sort of Michael and pirates at night, and the pirates coming alive and him having fun with the pirates. And another one was something more Fantasyland based. But the idea of really sort of George and Michael, all of that.
Yeah, it just makes sense.
Just made sense. So everybody gravitated to that. Within like another week or so, if that, George was in the room. And we presented to George, and George said, I like that one. And then about a week later, Michael was in the room, and we presented to Michael, and he liked that one.
Wow.
And that launched Captain EO. Yeah. And I actually, I realized what I'd said after I said it at the end, because my final line of summing up this story, because we didn't pitch the other ones to Mike, we just pitched the one that everybody wanted to go forward with. And I said, yes, your character brings color to a colorless world.
Oh.
And as I'm saying
I get what you were trying for.
Well, because it went from black and white sketches to a colored sketch,
yes.
with beautiful Technicolor color.
We are here to change the world.
And I'm looking at Michael as I'm saying it, and there's this twinkle in his eye and an instant recognition of what I'd said, and it was left at that. And so that's how that came to be.
That's hilarious. I love Captain EO. I mean, everybody. It was a lot
of fun.
It's just such a. I wish that there was some way to somehow bring it back, even just for a festival or.
Well, we brought it back a second time, sadly, when Michael passed.
I know that was incredible. I get to see it at that point too.
Yeah,
but
we had a 4 that moved then that we didn't have before. So.
Yeah. Oh man, I just wonder if it could ever, if we could do it again. Anyway. But that's cool. That's right. I completely even forgot that you're a part of that. So Captain EO, what an amazing experience to have been a part of all of that. And thank goodness, because I feel like that really, sort of opened up what else could be done at Disney, that you could bring in pop stars, and you could have sort of, and people like George Lucas, and make it cinematic and really tell that story in a different way, that it just brought into a theme park sort of a whole new world. When I talk about sometimes people like going to Disney, to a Disney park for the first time, I think they might have only been on carousels or Ferris wheels at other parks, and then they have an experience like going to a Disney park and getting completely immersed in a story and a world and feeling like they're part of the story. And that just has to be so magical to work with and inspiring. Does it inspire you?
Well, yes, it does. And it also, I look back and realize how many different opportunities I had, both in Disney and recognizing that I worked for Disney for 31 years, and I've had my own company for the last 16, worked with Disney on a few more attractions in that time, but also part of my reason for leaving Disney was to work with others and other parts of the industry and other parts of the world, at least have that opportunity. And I've been very fortunate that a lot of opportunity came that way. But I think it's what I was saying in response to your question is really, American Adventure was a it took a step into the future at the time with how animated figures could contribute to shows. To do a show that's 30 minutes, 33 minutes long, unheard of in the annals of attractions, I think.
Truly.
And that's not counting pre-shows or anything else. That's just sitting down and having 33 minutes of that experience. Still, I think probably the longest, non-live show in any theme park.
It must be.
But the idea of the use of the animated figure at the time and to be able to tell a true emotional story, not just have fun with it and be whimsy or representative of characters that you've already gotten to know on screen and all those kind of things, was opened up opportunities both for Disney and for others to think about how you can use those figures. Captain EO opened up a whole new opportunity for the exploration of 3D, which went in all different kinds of directions. But again, being a part of these different steps forward in the industry, not realizing at the time, but looking backward, you can see each one has sprung, and opened up opportunities, is a pretty remarkable thing to have been that, given that much opportunity at so many different places along my career. So, Soarin is another one, the whole flying theater world that has opened up. So I like to say it's an old SNL line, but it was Garrett Morris that said, "Baseball been good to me," and I sort of want to say, themed entertainment industry has been good to me.
Themed entertainment's been good to me.
So.
And speaking of themed entertainment and it being good to you, can I nerd out with you on a couple of things?
Sure.
So we got to talk about Alien Encounter.
Sure.
This cult classic. Now, of course, American Adventure will live forever, and the people who went on ExtraTERROrestrial Alien Encounter, the original and the remakes, is a small number, but I am one of those people. I went during the previews and got scared out of my mind. So can you tell us about your involvement with that? Because I love all of everything behind Alien Encounter.
Well, that was such a fun opportunity for me. One of the things, I think we talked a little briefly about this before with Backstage Magic, is I won't say half of my career, but a good chunk of my career was involved in helping improve shows that were already in the process of being delivered, that for whatever reason hadn't quite gotten to the point where everybody was saying, that's ready to go. Let's go. And so Alien Encounter was one of those shows. And I was actually working on Honey, I Shrunk the Audience in Florida. And while I was doing that, the team was up in Magic Kingdom getting ExtraTERROrestrial. And we were hearing, those of us working on Honey, that there was some issues. Michael would come down and see whatever they were doing and wasn't quite satisfied. So I'm finishing up, it was close to Thanksgiving, and Marty Sklar, Tom Fitzgerald, I get a call from them, and they said, before you come home, we'd like you to go over and see where that show is with what they're developing, and then we'll talk when you come back to California. So, okay. So I went and saw it, and then I came back to California, and they said, so Michael doesn't think it's working, and we want you to consider how you might make it work.
Okay.
Well, that's a tough thing, first of all, because you have a group of people that have worked for several years or more, put their heart and soul into something.
It's tricky, I'm sure.
And now you want somebody completely outside of that to come in and have a look at it and make a recommendation. And I can think later, I guess it was a bit like Brad Bird with Ratatouille. And Brad was more maybe forthright. I learned in the month while I was developing the new idea that I had to be that forthright when I went to pitch it to Eisner. Was, okay, so it wasn't working. Here's why I believe it wasn't working. I think the majority of everybody that's involved with it supports this. So it's not like everybody's going, oh, this is awful and we don't want to work on this show that we put our heart and soul into. A few people that were key to its initial development said, okay, goodbye, which was fine. But fundamentally, the issue as I saw it was they had taken on this idea of doing a in-the-dark show, using audio as the storytelling device. And I hearken back to when I was a kid and we used to climb in a closet and close the door. What happens?
It gets scary.
Immediately people start to scream.
Oh, yeah, that's true too.
Well, when people scream, you can't hear
anything. So
and that was part of what was going on, is people were instantly lost from getting the audio show because they couldn't hear it and they were detached from it and they were afraid of what was going to happen. So it was like, how do you use that but not count on that being the central and only way to deliver the show?
Right.
So the first step was, we'll turn the lights on and off a few times so that people get centered again, and then can have these more terrifying experiences. And then don't rely on those terrifying experiences to rely on narrative. Rely on the response to the narrative that you've got that leads up to when the lights go out. That was my simple sort of like appraisal of what was lost in what they'd been doing, because they'd gotten so deep into trying to do this, see something and then go into this long chapter of darkness, tell a story within the darkness, and then come back out of it. So this is where I first got to work with Jerry Reese, who was on the show as sort of the media director and had directed all of the talent and all the different things. And so working with him and working with several others, recrafting the show. And so one of the things that it led to, which up to that point had been absolutely taboo, is how to put a live actor into a show, not a live show, but a show that runs X number of cycles, 4 cycles at 5 cycles an hour, put live actors in there. So we did, because that had to be one of the ways to make that thing work and give us an excuse to get the lights back on and then have the lights go back out and all that went with it. So a lot of reformulation. So 1 month, we did all of that work, and we were basically back into Eisner's office in early January, pitched the show. And I remember going in when I was pitching it thinking, I'm going to pitch the show, and if they like it, good.
Great.
If they don't, I'm not going to fix it. This is it.
Yeah.
You ask me what I think.
This is the fix.
And this is the fix, and I'm prepared to follow my sword, and you can scoop me up and bring the next one in. So we had the presentation, and I didn't have to follow my sword, and they said, go. And oh, by the way, you have 5.5 months.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
And so, and that included like rebuilding the figure, changing the functions of the explosive tube, a bunch of other effects being added, just a myriad of not just re-scripting, but of completely redoing, but within the confines of the fact that we had the basic bones of this show. The whole pre-show changed. We had little Skippy that was going to be teleported.
Yeah, Skippy.
But we changed the character to evolve into the fellow who was demonstrating it to be Sir. I forget what SIR stood for at the time. Curry, Tim Curry, we got him in to do the voice.
Good. Yeah.
So it's interesting to sort of think, because at the time, I don't think any of us were envisioning we were going to create a cult favorite, which was wonderful to see happen later. But Tim, having been a part of a very cult favorite movie,
yes,
it was fun to work with him. But he came in and gave us a magnificent performance of Sir. And so changing the personality of the whole thing a little bit, but tweaking it against this backbone of a good idea, but making it deliver in a way that the audience could enjoy and connect with a story, and still use the darkness and still use the binaural sound to our advantage. So, I mean, we added the tickler,
brilliant.
all those kind of things. And one last little thing that was sort of fun about that is, as the first time I don't know whether it was the first time. Yeah, it was. The first time I'd worked with a company here in Southern California called S Central. They make the scents that virtually the entire industry uses in all the different shows that want to have scent in them. And so we needed a smell for the alien's breath. Yeah. So I called Lorraine up and I said, Lorraine, we need an alien breath. And she said, so describe it to me. And I said, okay. High school football team, boy locker room, end of season.
Ew.
and so like several weeks later, these little packets of, scent number 1, scent number 2, scent number 3 come to us, and we passed them around, and they were all pretty obnoxious, but one of them was the winner, and but those are the fun things, I think, of like I say, this required a completely dedicated staff. We were, for the most part, left alone because everybody said, go do that, and trusted myself and Brian Farron, who was sort of the head of the technical effects team's delivery and so forth. We pulled people that hadn't already been part of the team who were all great. We pulled several extra individuals out of Imagineering who were great in their field. So we had this like amazing team.
Dream team.
It was a dream team. And we literally all it was like, there was not a whole lot going on anywhere except at Walt Disney World. The shops were building the new figure, rebuilding Sir. We had, all the effects teams were doing the installation and development and sort of mock-upping and everything, all there.
Yeah.
It was like theater again. It was not, like go build things and then come to the field and put them all together. Didn't have time for that. So it was really a lot of fun. And not that was the core to the success, but I think that was part of the success of this attraction was we just had this like really focused, dedicated, amazingly talented group of individuals who were left alone by management and did what we did, and it succeeded. It was just the great attraction in the wrong park.
It was that's exactly what it is. It was the right attraction in the wrong park. Those of us who remember it and absolutely love it, we're absolutely scared out of their minds by it. And I just even last October went to see a local theater group put together. Have you heard of this?
Oh, yes.
I went to see it. It was
how was it?
It just like drenched us in blood. But they parodied the whole thing that I think that if you didn't ever go to it, you'd still think it was a fun night out. But if you did, like, you got all the inside jokes of it. And I wish it was phenomenal. There's no footage though, because you'd get so.
That's too bad.
And then hearing about the scent of the alien though brings us right into Soarin. I mean, that's a perfect segue. Can you tell me a little bit about getting Soarin off the ground, as they say?
Well done. I grew up as a Californian, born and raised. My father moved here in the late 30s. California was always a unique place to me. I was able to travel to a lot of it as a kid and just understood how diverse California was. And the idea of flying, when we were developing all of the park, this idea of, one of the shows should share how extraordinarily diverse this California place is. And so Soarin was born out of this idea of really that, exploring the place, not the people, so much. There were other shows that got into the Hollywood culture and all the rest of that, but this was as much about the landscapes and how people enjoy the landscapes, of course,
and the beauty.
But it's really the beauty of the landscape and what Mother Nature has provided to what is in California today. And so with that idea and the ability to think about how do we do that in a fun experience. And so California has always been known as a place that has a connection to aviation, to everything from, the Lindbergh's plane being built in San Diego, to some of the early sort of steps in taking hang gliding into the air. Hot air ballooning has always been a part of the northern vineyards and down, and I guess also in Riverside and down in those areas. So there's a bunch of tradition about the aircraft industry and just in general flying. And so that was a piece of what surfaced early on of the big stories in California. Flying as one of those, or going up into the air. And so then it was like, well, how do we do that? And the initial was the hot air balloon, literally was one of the first things. We talked about hang gliding, and we went, no, that won't work.
You see a hang glider, but
And so then we explored hot air ballooning, and then we came back to this idea really of detaching people from such an obvious, and also it started to create this sense of, well, if we do that, is it circle vision wrapped around a gondola? I mean, it was just it didn't feel right. It just didn't, and capacity and all those other things. So one thing led to another, and we were back to, let's go after something like a hang glider can take us on this journey. And that was stalled until an engineer figured out how to do it.
Exactly.
And when Mark Sumner came in with his little erector set, that solved that problem. And so then at that point, it was interesting. Probably the biggest part of that was there was some debate early on, creatively, about narrative. And people need to know where they are and what they're seeing.
Okay.
And I had this feeling like flying is just such an extraordinary experience. Let me just enjoy it and let me experience it. So we had quite a lot of debates while the show was developed. I'd shot the show. There was still debate about narrative. And so finally, probably one of the only creative fights I had with one of my best friends there at Disney at the time, who was the producer while I was the sort of creative director for the whole thing. He was the executive producer. I said, I just think it's fundamentally wrong. And we need to let Jerry Goldsmith's music carry the day.
It's beautiful.
With effects. And so those of you who remember the early show there was this little waiting area before Patrick Warburton came on the screen to brief us, where there's clouds and there's Palm Springs, woods. Yeah, so that was the compromise. Since then, and I've done a lot of flying theaters outside of Disney.
Yes,
that's
Fly
the unique
Canada.
thing again. Mm-hmm. We were talking about these different attractions that I've had the fortunate opportunity to develop and work on that have opened up doorways for myself and others into other shows. Soarin the flying theater was definitely one of those. So I've done 15, I think, different flying experiences outside of Disney since then, and with much more sophisticated equipment and all the rest of it. But the fundamental has always stayed true to the fact that people want to and do just enjoy the experience.
Yeah.
And then they have curiosity. Where did I go? Okay, well then that's what a post show is for. So anyways, but that, the birth of that idea was really just, it's fun to fly.
It's fun to fly. It's fun to see all these things that you might not get to see, or maybe that you've seen, but see it from a different perspective.
And that's the second thing. That's right.
Soarin' Over the World especially did that, the Great Wall and everything. But I have to say, Soarin' Over California right now is at DCA, Disney California Adventure, for the California Food and Wine Festival. And, seeing it this year after all of the wildfires and everything that happened in Los Angeles, I think a lot of people in the audience, there was definitely a sort of a shift of reminding us how beautiful California is, and it stands the test of time. I know you're saying that it's been, there are others that you've done that have maybe more sophisticated. Back then you filmed it on film, is my understanding, right? The Soarin' Over California was shot on basically film.
We shot it on IMAX.
Yeah. And
now it's all digital,
right? But I mean, it still stands, and really, I think, brings the heart of, especially after everything that's happened in California this year.
Well,
so it was really beautiful.
I believe strongly that the flying experience, connected with what Mother Nature has created all over the globe, is more than enough opportunity to create great experiences. Mm-hmm. And I recently did a show with the Flyover group that I've done many experiences with, which was in Chicago, where really we took on urban landscape, totally embraced it. And Chicago's a unique enough city, and unique both in what it is as a place and what it was to allow us to do what we wanted to do there in terms of shooting in a city like that. It was very unique. But I still believe, even though that is a tremendously fun show, and it really shows off the essence of Chicago and the spirit of Chicago in a beautiful way, that the natural settings that we can take people to, whether it's Iceland or anywhere in the world, it holds an emotional, or makes an emotional connection with guests that CG does not do.
So true, right? Feeling like you're in nature. And
even if you try and simulate that you're in nature. CG won't, that people know.
Yeah.
It's getting closer and closer, but to really duplicate all of what the goes into what isn't real is very costly and time consuming, and even then is not sometimes as easy to do that to just find a beautiful story in a beautiful place and go make an experience out of real things in real places. So anyways, but that whole industry, not just the opportunity for me to continue with creating flying films and flying experiences, is just the whole idea of what it opened up to others. Yeah. So.
Well, to that I say, nice work, pal. I had to do it. I had it in my head. You've never heard that one before. Listen, I don't have you for that much time. You've already spent so much time with me. But I know that there are people listening who would love any advice that you could give them, for anybody who listens to you and says, oh my gosh, I would love to have a career like this man. What advice would you give them?
There's not a short answer.
Right. Then this will be the last one.
But I do think to try and make it short from a standpoint of clear, when opportunity shows itself, if you have any sense that you emotionally connect with that opportunity, follow that instinct. It's easy enough to also, have that other inner voice go, but then there's all this reason I shouldn't do that, or will it work out, or whatever. It's like, no, go back to, does it connect with you? Whatever it might be. And it may not be on the path that you thought you were on. If it connects with you, that's something interesting. It may not have been exactly what I was hoping I'd do next, but it's in line with something, then go for it. So that's part of it. And I think the other one is to trust yourself when others trust you, because you won't have those opportunities unless someone else trusts you, that they may see something in you that you don't quite see yet, which may be like, can I actually do that? Can I deliver on what I'm being asked to do?
Yeah, imposter syndrome is real.
Yeah, but trust generally, I think, the individual who's made that offer to have recognized something in you, or they would not have made that offer. And therefore, take that risk and then see what you can do to take advantage of being given that opportunity.
That's a great answer. I feel like you're talking directly to me and things that I've been thinking recently. So thank you so much for sitting down, and congratulations on this Buzz Price Lifetime Achievement Award. Truly incredible. And thanks for being here and talking to us today.
Thank you very much.
So nice to meet you.
Thank you all.
Thank you again so much to Rick Rothschild for talking with me, and also a huge thank you to friend of Ace and the podcast and me, Susan Story from Story to Story Communications. She set up the interview and she gave me this opportunity to speak to a legend, and I am so grateful. And I'm grateful to you all for listening. Thank you so much. If you haven't already, we would love for you to subscribe to the podcast and give us 5 stars if you can, rate and review. And if you have any questions, comments, or podcast episode pitches for us, please reach out to podcast@aceonline.org. Don't forget to check the website, ridewithace.com. And remember that ACE is everywhere you consume your social media. We shared a lot about the THEA Awards and TEA Connect on Instagram, Facebook, X, Threads, Pinterest, LinkedIn. Make sure you subscribe to ACE's pages on YouTube, on TikTok, Discord. Follow ACE everywhere to stay on top of all of the coaster and park news coming out, and to hear what your ACE membership has to offer. Thanks for listening. I hope you get to ride a coaster today.
Ride With Us is produced by the American Coaster Enthusiasts, a registered 501c3 organization. Visit ridewithace.com for additional information, and we will see you at the parks.